All right. Welcome to a four-part mini-series split between myself and Rabbi Abby on mental health and Halacha. This week, the first of four is mental health and human dignity. Rabbi Abby will be talking about OCD. The following week, I will then be following up with mental health and pikuach nefesh. Cases, questions about where mental health considerations constitute life-saving circumstances within Halachah. And then the last week, Rabbi Abby, do you remember what you were speaking about for the last week?
Mental health.
Right, the imperative to guard your life and mental health. Okay, so obviously a lot of these questions are very serious and very real-world questions. For all practical questions, please see your shul rav. Certainly do not do anything based on anything that we discuss here. I want to look at two principal questions. The first question is, what allowances are made in Halachah for the sake of preserving a person's dignity? That's number one. And then number two, is the definition of recognized dignity based on the individual? So that if you had somebody who was dealing with particular sensitivities, which can come up in the case of mental illness, it can come up in other cases as well, would we say that whatever rules you're willing to break for the sake of kavod habrios, for the sake of human dignity in general, will be broken for them, even though it wouldn't be broken for somebody else? Is it a subjective standard or is it an objective standard? So those are our two questions. What allowances are there in Halacha in general for kavod habrios, for human dignity, and is it subjective or objective? So we start out with the basic idea that kavod habrios, which I keep translating as human dignity, literally it's the honor of the creatures. Right? Or the honor of the creatures, I think is good enough. Honor of the creations, perhaps. But the basic idea that kavod habrios carries halachic weight is expressed most clearly in a Gemara in Brachos, which is source number 1. The Gemara in context is discussing the issue in which somebody is walking in the marketplace and he realizes that there's shatnez in his clothing. So, what does he do at that point? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Rav Hamotzi Kilayim Bebigdo Poshtan. Rabbi Yehuda says, quoting Rav, if you find shatnez in your clothing, remove it. Right? This assumes, I think, a level of awareness of fabric chemistry that we just don't have at this point. Like, I need to go to an expert to tell me if there's shatnez in my clothing. I don't know how I'm walking in the marketplace and suddenly it dawns on me that there's wool and linen in my clothing. Nonetheless, you're walking in the marketplace and lo and behold, there's shatnez in your clothing. You remove it, even if you're in the middle of the marketplace and we're assuming it's going to be an embarrassing thing. We're not talking about where you're taking off a sweater and you have a shirt and pants underneath. We're talking about where the person is going to enter into an embarrassing situation. My time. Why? Because we have a principle, ein chachma vein tvuna vein eitzel neged Hashem. There is no such thing as wisdom, understanding, counsel opposite God, meaning that whatever your standing is, whatever your dignity is, whatever your wisdom is, doesn't matter ultimately when you're dealing with the honor of God as expressed in the fulfillment of mitzvos. Kol makom sheishchil Hashem, ein cholkin kavod l'rav. If there is desecration of God's name, and the assumption is that by violating a mitzvah you are desecrating God's name, so we don't show any respect whatsoever for your dignity. We worry about God's dignity. That's the basic principle. That it seems Halacha overrides human dignity. The Gemara then brings 5 challenges, and I broke them out into bullet points to help make that clear. 5 challenges to this idea that mitzvos will come before a person's dignity. The first 3 are all going to be dealt with in the same way, by explaining that all 3 cases that we're about to see, in which dignity overrides halacha, all are cases where the halacha involved is a derabanan. So the first challenge, meisvei, the Gemara asks, we've learned, kavru es hameis v'chazu. This is actually the core case in Brachos that they're dealing with. They're talking about the issue of people who are attending a funeral or taking part actively in a funeral, in which mitzvos the funeral overrides. So we learn, kavru es hameis v'chazru. if they bury the body, and then they're on their way back from the cemetery, and there are two paths they could travel. One is tahor, and one involves tumah, and the travelers on that path are going to contract tumah, and there are kohanim among the travelers. So, ba b'tahora, I added in the word in brackets, if the avel walks on the pure path, bo enimo b'tahora, so you escort him on the pure path, why not? Ba b'tmeya, but if the avel walks on the tamei path, bo enimo b'tmeya mishum kavodo, even though you're going to contract tumah, which is an isser de'oraisa, kohanim are not allowed to become tamei, nonetheless, they escort him for his dignity. It's not right that he should walk alone. End of quote. The Gemara says, why? Didn't you just tell me that halacha comes before a person's dignity? So, Tirgama, Rabbi Abba explains what we're talking about is where you'd be traveling on a road in which tumah exists, but only rabbinically defined tumah. The case of a Beis Hapras is a case, roughly speaking, where there may have been a body that was lost within the field. We're not really sure. I'm not going into the ins and outs of the Beis Hapras discussion. They don't really relate to our issue. But the point is that because it's a rabbinic law, therefore, the dignity will override. Second example of this, the second case, I'm going to say outside in the interest of time, Rabbi Tzadok talks about how they would leap over caskets in order to go greet kings. Because of Kavod Malachim, because of the honor of the king. But again, this included Kohanim. How is it that they were allowed to do this? Leave aside the separate question in general about stepping over a casket, right? There's the issue of walking over graves having to do with the honor of the mace. But that's not his discussion here. His discussion here is Tumah. So the Gemara's answer, once again, is that this was a situation in which Tumah would only apply rabbinically. Tumah would not apply biblically because of the space in the casket between the body and the top of the casket. There really shouldn't be a concern for Tumah. There's simply a rabbinic consideration for Tumah, and that's what's overridden, in this case for Kavod Malachim, for the honor of the king. And then the third case, which we will spell out, because this is the one that you see quoted most commonly, Tashma, the third bullet point in source number 1. They quote a basic principle. Gadol Kavod Abrios, Shadocha Lo Saseh Shabbatorah. Kavod Abrios is great, human dignity is great, it overrides what sounds like a biblical prohibition. End of quote. Well, that seems to be fairly clear then, that in fact human dignity overrides a deoraisa. Why? What happened to saying that God's dignity comes first? So, Tirgama Rav Bar Shava Hamed Rav Kahana Belav Lo Sasser. This is a great exchange. Rav Bar Shava is learning in front of Rav Kahana, and he says, when it says it overrides a biblical prohibition, it means the prohibition of Lo Sasur, the prohibition against violating rabbinic law. Lo Sasur says you're not allowed to break rabbinic law. So when you say that kavod overrides biblical law, it only really overrides rabbinic law, which is sort of quasi-biblical because the Torah says you have to observe it. So achichu alei, they laughed at him in a discussion about kavod habrios. There in the base medrash, they said, that was really funny, Rav Bar Shava. They laughed at him. Lav de lo sasur deoraisa. You're back to square one. It's a deoraisa. So Amar Rav Kahana says, Gabra Rabba Amar Milsa lo tachichu alei. He says, he's a great man. He said something. You shouldn't laugh at it. Other people maybe. Kol mili de Rabbanan asmechinu alav de lo sasur mishum kvodo sharu Rabbanan. All lessons of the Rabbanan are linked to this lav of lo sasur, and because of this person's dignity, the Rabbanan permitted. In other words, it's true that lo sasur is a deoraisa. However, all the statements that come under lo sasur are decrees made by rabbis. And the rabbis themselves said, we are not applying our decree in a case where it will affect human dignity. That's the way around. The biblical rule of you should follow the Rabbanan is still in place. But the decrees of the rabbis were made taking this into consideration. All three of these first bullet points here are challenges which are resolved by saying human dignity overrides rabbinic law. The fourth case is a little bit different. Tashma. They ask from the mitzvah of Hashabas Aveda, the mitzvah of restoring lost property. The Torah says, when it discusses what you should do when you encounter somebody's lost property, V'his alam tamehem. Literally, in context, it's you shall not abandon them. Don't see them and be mit'alein. To be mit'alein is to pretend you didn't see it in the first place. Don't see this person's property and pretend that you didn't see it. However, the way it's worded in the Torah, it sounds like it's saying, and you shall act as though you didn't see it. The wording in the pasuk could be read that way. Based on where the pause is, right before this clause, V'yisalam tamehem, it's the way it goes, something on the lines of, Lo sira'es sharachicha oes hayoni dachim ba'derech, v'yisalam tamehem. Don't see his animal wandering in the road, and abandon them. But it almost sounds like, and abandon them. So the Gemara takes that and says, yeah, there are times when you are supposed to abandon them and sometimes not. Haketzad, how so? If you're a Kohen and his property is in a cemetery, or you are an elder, and it's not suitable for your dignity for you to go get his property, or you have more work to do than he does, then you are allowed to walk away. So the Gemara is concerned with the middle case, where you say it's beneath my dignity to go get his property, right? So let's say I come home, I get out of my car, and I see the neighbor's ball is sitting there in the mud in the gutter. I look at that and say, well, I'm wearing my nice suit, I'm carrying my svarim. Do I have to go get his ball out of the gutter? It's beneath my dignity. Let's pretend I had dignity. That will be a case. So then I'm allowed to say, don't get involved. So the Gemara says, why? Again, there's a mitzvah of Hashavas Haveda. It's a mitzvah from the Torah. Why? Under your dignity, that's why you're exempt. So the Gemara answers, Sha'ani Hasam, that's different. Because the Torah says, V'hisalamta mehem, that you can abandon it. The Torah told you. So the Gemara says, yeah, well, v'ligmar mina, then why can't we deduce from there, I added the word in brackets, for kilayim. Why don't we deduce from there and say that just like when it comes to restoring a lost object, your dignity comes first, so too for kilayim, your dignity should come first. So the Gemara answers, Isura mi mamona lo yalfinan. This is a financial case. This is really not about an isur. It's not about, kosher and treif and shatnez and tuma. This is a financial claim the other guy has. Why didn't you give me back my property? So if it's a financial matter, you're entitled to say your dignity comes first. That's the Gemara's answer in this case. And then you get the last case. The last case is regarding a case of sheva al tasa, and this is another very important distinction. So we'll take a look at this. The Gemara talks about the case in which you are en route to do an important mitzvah. You're going to shech the korban pesach. You're going to do a bris milah. So not you. Somebody is on their way to do such a mitzvah, and then they hear that they lost a relative. So the question is, should they become tamei in order to take care of their relative, knowing that will keep them from doing their mitzvah of the korban pesach? Not so clear regarding the bris milah, but regarding the korban pesach. And then the Gemara brings in the case of mace mitzvah. Case of mace mitzvah is somebody died. There isn't an adequate group to take care of the mace. For the honor of this person who passed away, we're going to drop everything and get involved in the mace mitzvah case. So the Gemara says, let's read it through. Tashma. The Torah tells me about certain cases in which one should become tamei or not become tamei. It's dealing in the context of Kohanim. Villa achoso. And for his sister, the Kohen becomes tamei, of his unmarried sister. Ma tamad lomar. The Gemara asks, why did you need to mention her? Haresha holech lishchot es pischa v'lomal es beno. He's going to shech his korban pesach. He's going to do a bris. Shama shemeis lameis. He hears that a relative has passed away. Yochol yachzor v'yitma. I might think he should become tamei. Amrit lo yitama. The Torah says, no, don't become tamei. You have your mitzvah to do. Shech your korban pesach. I might think that the same thing would be true for a mace mitzvah, that he would not become tamei for the mace mitzvah. Talmud lomar villa achoso, the vav. I think it's from the vav. I think so. There's a whole discussion in Rashi there. La achoso hu de'eno mitame ala mitame hu mace mitzvah. He wouldn't become tamei for his own sister, but he would become tamei for a mace mitzvah. Even though he'll miss, these are the only two mitzvahs aseh for which the punishment is kares, if a person skips them. Bris milah and korban pesach. Now, it's not his own bris milah, it's his son's bris milah. Whether there's kares or not is a discussion. But surely these are important mitzvahs, these are biblical mitzvahs. How is it that you're passing up on these opportunities? Sha'ani hasam dichsiv v'la'achoso. So the Gemara says, well, it's different because you have a pasuk. Just like we did regarding Hashavas Aveda. To which the Gemara asks, v'ligmor mina. So why don't we deduce from there? Why don't we say from there to teach me about kilayim, just like Meis Mitzvah overrides, so too for kilayim we'll say don't take off the clothing that has sha'anis in it. Shev v'al ta'aseh sha'ani. Yes, this is a biblical law, but it's a shev v'al ta'aseh case. It's a case of not acting. The rule may be that kavod habrios, human dignity, will override other halachic issues. Human dignity will override other halachic issues, even biblical ones, if it's a matter of inaction. Okay, so we have three exceptions now. Number one, human dignity overrides derabbanans. Number two, human dignity may override somebody else's financial claim, hashavas aveda. And number three, human dignity may override a deoraisa, biblical rule, if you're dealing with a sheval taseh, inaction. So you might ask, if I weren't rushing so much through this, you might have the presence of mind to say, well, wait a minute, the Sha'anis case is sheval taseh. I was going to ask that. Sha'anis case is sheval taseh, I'll leave it on. Why don't we call that sheval taseh also and say that you should be exempt? So the Tur quotes the Rosh, and the Ramah brings it in source number 2 to say that the case in the Gemara where we insist that you remove it is a mazid case. You knew what you were doing. It wasn't accidental. It was actually intentional. This is hard to sustain in our edition of the Gemara. The Rosh has to have a different edition.
And then you do tshuva and you say, you know what, I really...
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you're walking through the fabric shop and every guy selling is Jewish and knows that you're wearing Shabbos.
Yeah, but it's still it was that you were mazid. Yeah. Well, there's certainly more of a Chil Hashem if they all know. Everybody in this world apparently knew what wool and linen looked like. But yeah, the Ramah. The funny thing is that it sounds worse to me that we don't know what wool and linen look like. It doesn't sound strange to me that the people should know. I feel like people should. Yeah.
No, because back then I guess your garments would be a lot more simpler and weren't engineered, and
yeah, but I think it's more our naivete about the world.
Yeah.
I think it's just we live at such a remove. We're the same people who look up at the sun and can't tell what time it is. It's our chisara. It's not that they were brilliant; it's that we are so dumb. But the Ramah writes in source number 2, V'yesh omrim dim haya halovesh shogig. Some say that if the person wearing the clothing is doing it accidentally, then ein tzarich lasos b'shuk. Then he wouldn't need to remove it. He could rely on this sheva al taseh. So there is such an idea. There's more to be said on this about the Rosh's position versus the position of other Rishonim, but I'm not going into that right now. There is a lot to be said regarding this. But those are our exceptions where we say human dignity will override. There is another case which you have to look at because it teaches another important principle here, and that's the Gemara in Shavuos Daf Lamed Amud Beis. Yeah.
That case, if he does the basic, it's sort of like a punishment now.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Well, what we're saying is you can't intentionally put this on and then, so to speak, hide under the cloak of human dignity. That's what we're saying. You can't make that kind of a claim at this point. It's less of a punishment and more to say, like, come on, pal. You set this up yourself.
So take it off and there's no
Yeah.
human dignity.
Correct. If you take a look at source number 3, this deals with a case of a Talmid Chacham who knows testimony in a particular case, and normally there's a mitzvah, you're required to testify. However, the judge before whom he would have to testify is beneath him. So, Ba'amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna is part of a series of statements here in the Gemara in Shavuos. Rabba Bar Rav Huna said, Hai Tzuba Merabanan de Yada B'Sahadusa. The Tzuba Merabanan is often a young Talmid Chacham, but lav dafka for our case. A Talmid Chacham who knows testimony. V'zila be'milsa l'meza l'be'daina dezuter minei la'ashude kamei. And it would be degrading for him to go to the Beis Din, which is lesser than him, to testify. Lo lezel, so don't go. He doesn't have to go to the Beis Din. So, Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi, Rav Shisha Breder Ravidi says, I knew that already. I knew that because we've learned, Matzah Sako Kupa Vein Darko Litol Areza Lo Yitol. We've learned that when it comes to restoring lost property, if he finds something which he wouldn't pick up for himself, he isn't obligated to pick it up for anybody else either. So I already know that. So the Gemara answers, yeah, but that, Hashavas Aveda, as we've already seen, is a financial case. not an Isser case. Hani mili b'mamona, that's a financial case. Ava b'Isura, when it comes to Isser, I would have said, in chachma v'intmuna v'neitzla naged Hashem, kol makom sheish b'chil Hashem, ein chochin kaval l'rav. I might have said, we compel him to testify here, and the novelty here is that we don't compel him to testify. That's the Gemara. That's our position. So Tosfos here jumps on this in source number 4, and he says, wait a minute. This is a Shevel Tasa case. Right? Don't go and testify. That's a Shevel Tasa case. And we already saw in our Gemara, in source number 1, that you don't have to do something if it's a Shevel Tasa case, even if you're dealing with an Isur discussion. We already said that. So I'm jumping to Tosfos' 2 bullet point answers there in source number 4. Very handy, those bullet points that they had in Tosfos. V'yesh lomar, he says, even handier is bolding things. You could answer, Dahasam ginai gadol hu lemeis mitzvah she'en lo kovrim. Lakach shevel ta'as teshar. He says, first of all, you could answer, don't bring me proofs from meis mitzvah. Because if there's a body and there aren't people around to bury it, that's a tremendous disgrace to a person. And I would have said, you can't deduce from there to the case of the Talmid Chacham. Poor guy, he has to testify in front of someone who's a lesser Talmid Chacham. You couldn't extrapolate from leaving a body without being properly buried to the case of the Talmid Chacham. That would be my first answer, Tosfos says. Or you could say, alternatively, you could say this really isn't a Shevel Tasa case, because if you fail to testify, they might give money to the wrong guy. Or whatever, it depends on what kind of case you're dealing with. You're causing people to sin. So don't tell me it's Shevel Tasa, I didn't do anything, because you are leading to inappropriate behavior with your failure to testify. But the key part of this that I want you to come away with is the point about distinguishing between lesser and greater disgrace. Because that's going to be a very big deal in our discussion, is the degree of embarrassment involved, the degree of offense to Kavod Habrios. So Kavod Habrios is now shown to override rabbinic law, to override potential financial claims in the case of lost objects, to override potentially a deoraisa and a shevel ta'aseh case, right? Perhaps depending on the degree of embarrassment that's involved, as this Tosfos points out. I brought you a couple of other sources, which I'm just going to reference here, but you have them there on the sheet if you want to look at them, which just highlight the way that Kavod Habrios shows up as a factor within rabbinic thinking. So, for example, in source number 5, we talk about somebody who has sinned so terribly that they're going to get executed by the sword. You have to be pretty bad in order to get to that point. You have to have done this intentionally with witnesses saying, I know that I'm going to be killed, I know I'm going to get killed, and I'm doing it on that with that in mind, and so forth. And yet, the Gemara says, we try to execute him in a more dignified way. You should love him, we're going to protect his dignity. We'll give him the less ignominious death. Or, another example of it is source number 6, in which Rabbi Meir says, and this is a classic, Rashi on the Chumash quotes it, that the reason why, if somebody, or the lesson of the fines when somebody steals an animal, where we say that if you steal an ox, so you pay damages fourfold. If you steal a sheep, if you steal an ox, you pay fivefold. If you steal a sheep, you only pay fourfold. Why do we have such a distinction? So one view brought in the Medrash here in source number 6 is that the ox walks on its own. The sheep you had to carry. You look silly walking around with a sheep on your shoulders. I mean, presumably he does it in a way that no one's going to see him. That's part of the idea of stealing. Otherwise he's not very good at it. But the idea is you had to reduce your dignity such that I'm going to give you a break, since you had to degrade yourself. We're dealing with criminals here. Another example with a criminal is the Medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, Perek Chaf, talks about Bilam and Bilam's donkey, and that Hashem kills Bilam's donkey after that whole incident. Why? Lest people make fun of Bilam whenever they see the donkey. That was the donkey that talked back to Bilam and made him look foolish. What do I care about Bilam's dignity? The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, whatever negative thing you can say about Bilam, you should say it is probably true. And yet, suddenly we're concerned about the dignity of the criminal. So the point is, I bring you all of this just to show you we care fundamentally about kavod habrios, about human dignity. Yaakov Blidstein, Professor Yaakov Blidstein, also known as Gerald in some of his articles, made a very interesting point, which I thought highly enough of. I retyped it in source number 7. In an article, Kavod Habrios v'Kavod Ha'adam, he points out something very interesting. He says, normally, the term kavod is associated with something else. It has a modifier. An example of this would be kavod haTorah, right? It's the honor of Torah. What other things do you find kavod associated with?
Kavod hameis.
Kavod hameis. What else? You can cheat and look at number 7. Kavod Shabbos would be one. He didn't even mention that one.
Kavod Adam.
I mean, he's talking about people. No, not Kavod Adam. That's the point. Kavod HaKahuna, right? Kavod HaMalchus, king. It's usually associated with something else. Saying kavod of brios defies that. It says everybody's kavod. It's not kavod associated with a particular standing. You're a Kohen, you're a Melech, you're a Talmid Chacham. It's kavod habrios. Everybody has the kavod. I have a typo in there when I retyped it. I'm missing a letter samach in that word towards the end of the second line. It should say oxymoron, not oxymoron. Yeah, that was I missed the samach. I apologize. Spell check didn't catch it. Oddly enough, but he says that's the value of saying kavod habrios, is to say it's not attached to a particular trait. It's for everybody. And when we say everybody, we it's a machlokas, but it seems like it refers not just to Jews even. It refers to everybody more broadly. If you take a look at source number 8, you find a statement of the Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin. The Rambam is talking about the way that courts conduct themselves, the way judges conduct themselves. And he writes, Ubakol yiyu ma'asav l'shem shamayim. The judge's deeds in every way should be altruistic. Val yiyeh kavod habrios kal be'einav. The dignity of the creatures should not be light in his eyes. Shari doches lo sashtei shel divrayim. After all, it violates their rabbanans. The kolshkein kavod b'nei Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov amachzikim b'taras ha'emes. And how much more so the honor of the descendants of Avraham Yitzchak and Yaakov, the members of the covenant. But if it's how much more so, that tells you that kavod habrios on a basic level is for everyone. There's more to be said about kavod habrios, Jews and non-Jews. I had a shiur that I gave for doctors at one point on it, and if you want, I can give you more references. But the bottom line out of this is that clearly it overrides the derabanan. Not only does it override a derabanan, but it also overrides, for Hilchos Shabbos purposes, a deoraisa with a shinoi. You could violate a deoraisa on Shabbos in an unusual way in order to preserve somebody's dignity. And I brought you a case here that's a classic example of that. Source number 9, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Kisem she'eno ochel behema. If you have a splinter, a piece of wood, which is not suitable for you to feed to an animal. So in other words, it's muktzah, because it had no function on Shabbos. Afilu litlok delachas bo shinav aser. So you're not allowed to pick it up, even if you want to use it as a toothpick. As I state the Shulchan Aruch. On this, the Mishnah Berurah writes, in number 10, granted there's an element of human dignity, if you have something stuck in your teeth. Sometimes the food between your teeth is visible to people. It's degrading. Nonetheless, it is prohibited, because you should have prepared it in advance. You should have thought of that. However, read the rest of the line first. Therefore, if somebody invites you for a Shabbos meal, and therefore, you didn't have the option of getting your toothpick ready the day before, you'd be allowed to move the splinter to use as a toothpick if you had nothing else to use. Now, that's not a chiddush, because that's only a derabanan. Muktzah is a derabanan, according to almost everybody in this universe. However, in the Sharat Tziyun, he adds a note. What if it's not a matter of moving the splinter? What if it's a matter of fixing it to make it usable? It's a little too thick. It can't fit between my teeth. I need to poke at it a little bit in order to shave it down so that it should fit. Now I'm fixing something on Shabbos. That's a deoraisa, but I'm doing it in an unusual way. I'm using my fingernail to do it. Says the Shara Tzion in source 11, you would be allowed to pick at the splinter with your hand, to be able to use it as a toothpick. If you have no other way to do it. That's his heter of a deoraisa with a shinoi for the sake of kavod abrios. So we're willing to go that far forward. There's an interesting note from the Or Sameach, which I reference here in number 12. I'm just going to say it outside. He says, you have to be careful of one element of kavod abrios. There are two ways to be concerned for human dignity. One way is what we've been talking about so far, like the case of the guy who's going to be walking around without his clothing in the marketplace, or the person who has stuff stuck between his teeth. It's keeping him from losing dignity. That's where you have this heter. As opposed to wanting to give somebody extra honor, wanting to elevate somebody, he said, they're not so fast. These heterim don't apply. It's about preserving what is, not about adding to the person's dignity. I thought that was an interesting distinction to make. I think there's room to argue it, but it's an interesting distinction to be made. What happened was he was asked a question about, it's fascinating, it's in the middle of his commentary to Hilchos Yontif. He was asked a question about whether a Jew would be allowed to play musical instruments on Yom Tov Sheni in honor of the king. The king's having a party. So is a Jew allowed to play musical instruments for the honor of the king? You're adding kavod, not preventing its diminution. Okay, that's Ayin Sham. See that in source number 12. But here is a big question. Why are we according such great status to kavod abrios? What is the underlying logic? We have now seen that we're willing to override the Rabbans. We may be willing to override a Deoraisa with a Sheva al Ta'aseh. What is this about? Why does kavod habrios override in Chachma vein Eitzav vein Tevuna Leneged Hashem? Why is it that we're willing to give this kind of standing to human dignity? What would you say?
Started with Adam and Chava. They wanted to wear clothes because they're on.
So Hashem was concerned. Hashem was concerned for their dignity, even though they were criminals. Right. So you could make the argument that it's about the fact that, look, Hashem cares about it, so we should care about this as well. We should avoid people being in such pain. In other words, the issue is tsar. The issue is the person's personal pain. And there is a view like that in Tosfos. If you jump to source number 15, those who were here when we talked about hair issues, dyeing hair and the like, we mentioned this then, the Gemara that Tosfos is commenting on, the Gemara in Shabbos, talks about males not using methods of beautification that are usually associated with women. But Tosfos writes, is talking about somebody who has scabs on his skin, and the Gemara says he'd be allowed to beautify himself and to remove the scabs. Tosfos says, "V'im ein lo tsar acher ela shemisbayesh lelech bein bnei adam shari dein lo chatzar gadol mizeh." Tosfos says even if the only embarrassment, and even if the only pain he's experiencing is it's embarrassing to walk around looking the way he looks, that's already sufficient to permit him to be able to beautify himself. Now, without discussing the whole beautification discussion, because there are points that can be made on that, and its relevance for kavod habrios, my point to bring this is simply to show you can make the argument that it's simply a matter of we care about people's feelings. That's a simple way to read it. Zalman, you were going to say? No? Okay. Any other rationales? So I'll give you a second rationale, and that is Tselem Elokim. You are created in the image, either the way most people read it, the image of God, or as Rashi reads it, the image designated by God for human beings. However you translate this, Nasa Adam Etzalenu Kidmusenu. Take a look at the Yerushalmi in Nedarim in source 13. This is a classic. The Torah says, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Rabbi Akiva says, Zeu klal gadol b'Torah. This is a great rule in the Torah. And most people stop there. But Ben Azai says, no. Ben Azai Omer, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. Zeh klal gadol mizeh. This is the book of the generations of man. That's a greater rule. What is he talking about? So if you continue in the Pasuk, they only quote part of the Pasuk, it talks about how Hashem created us. The fact that Hashem created us, that is what gives it special standing. That's why you have to worry about kavod habrios. It's not just about love people as yourself. It's about recognizing that we were created by Hashem. That's why it should apply to Jews and non-Jews alike. We were all created by Hashem. Such that, in source number 14, we are taught that the criminal who is executed, you shouldn't leave his body out overnight, you shouldn't leave his body out overnight, and it's called kilalas elokim, to leave him out. It's like a curse. It's blasphemy towards God to leave him out. So that kavod habrios is not actually overriding halacha, it's actually honoring halacha. When we honor human beings, we are effectively honoring Hashem, because we were created in this image that Hashem designated on our behalf. So that's stronger. In other words, the first view that we presented was that it's about tsar, that it's about a person's embarrassment. Our second view is, this actually is a means of honoring God. But then there's a third argument that I'd like to float. And this is the source that you were wondering about, Jeffrey, when you saw the source sheets that I sent out. I think you could actually float an additional idea. And this is a modern idea. This you will not find in any older sources, because I think it's only an issue that has been recognized bismanenu. The classic view was that a person's dignity is not really related to the person's health. Meaning, you have certain needs in life, right? Think like a Maslow pyramid, right? You have certain things that you need in life. You need to have food. You need to have clothing. You need to have shelter. And then there are other things that matter to you, but are less serious to your continued existence. And one of them would be dignity. Good to have, but if you can't afford it, it's either that or food, you're going to go with food. So I gave you an example, a quote from Rav Kook in source number 16, where he's talking about which factors are recognized as overriding a mitzvah. And Rav Kook says over there, Mishpatei Taras Hashem Tamima Shenozdu B'Taras Hamuskal Ha'ela Nalim Hema Mikol Chukei Hamufursamos Shel Tov V'Ra. He says the laws of the Torah of Hashem are more important than all of the things that you label good or bad. Umehem gam kavod habrios nimtza, including kavod habrios. The laws of God are more important, and he quotes you the famous principle, en chachma vein tvuna vein eitzla neged Hashem. As opposed to, he continues to say, ma she'en kein hachukim hanogim l'chayei nefashos, as opposed to things that are life and death. K'mo chukei harafua, like healing, chukei hatmadat habriut, perpetuating a person's health. Bahem ein lahashtiach al chukei nimus v'kavod. Then it's not about your dignity, your honor, but there are certain things that there's medical needs, and then below it there's dignity. However, psychologists are determining today that there is a real link, a substantive link, between dignity and self-image, and the impact of that image on a person's health. Meaning that people who have a diminished self-image, people who lose their self-respect, will, unfortunately, end up either being careless with their health or even, Rahman al-Litzlan, doing things to harm this health. I brought you an example from source number 17. Someone sent me this article just 2 weeks ago, and it makes a lot of sense. It fits with other ideas that I've seen elsewhere, and I excerpted a significant chunk of it here. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud. It's the source in English on the sheets. That's hopefully people can read that. But basically, what the article contends is that they did studies of self-injury among teens. And they wanted to understand why teens would harm themselves. And not only that, but why certain teens, when they're subjected to pain, will endure it longer than others will. They'll continue when others will pull away. And in the article, you can find the article online, it's available, discusses the different stages of the research. And what they came out with from this, and it's really a meta-study, they combining other studies to do this, but what they seem to find is that the teens that they're dealing with find meaning in their injury. If you think of like a Viktor Frankl logotherapy type meaning, they find meaning in it. They believe that they are bad, and that they deserve it, and therefore the injury is good in that sense. And therefore they're willing to experience it, and even to seek it out, but certainly to tolerate. And they'll say negative things about themselves. They'll believe negative things about themselves, and that's more likely to lead down this road. So I think what this means, in terms of relating it to our discussion here, is that kavod habrios is a health issue. Not for everybody. There are people who are more vulnerable to this than to others. But there will be people for whom kavod habrios is not only about pain of embarrassment generically, and not only about tzelem elokim, but it's also a very real health issue. So those are three bases for why we would accord kavod habrios great status. I'm not pretending that the modern psychological discovery is predicted in older material on kavod habrios, but I'm saying that when we weigh kavod habrios issues, this has to be a factor, because it's something that's being substantiated in research today.
We also know that 97% of kids that commit self-harm do it because they think nobody notices them.
97.
97%.
That is a wild percent. Really. Well, what more evidence do you need than that?
On the Elohim rationale, so how do you deal then with Ein Chachma Vein Tfuna Vein Eitzah? Because it's God against God then.
Right.
So why do you say Ein Chachma Vein Tfuna and all this? Because of it's just man's kavod you worry about.
Right, so you don't say in kavod. We don't say in chachma vein eitzah. Then it overrides. You're asking for deraisas?
No, yeah, instead of, usually the thing is we say, by deraisa, for example.
You're asking for a deraisa. So I think the answer would have to be that Hashem designed the Torah with certain expectations, and it's just the Rabbanan who aren't able to.
No, but you're saying Tzem Elohim, then you're weighing God against God.
Right, but God can do that in the same way that Hashem said, "Don't light a fire on Shabbos, but bring me karbanos." Right? In other words, God can say, yes, I created you with Tzelem Elokim, and yes, here are my expectations for what you're going to do with that. The Rabbanan aren't able, though, to overpower that. So there are quite a few applications of the heter of kavod habrios. I hesitate to use the word heter, because really it's a mandate of kavod habrios. In other words, in a situation in which kavod habrios says, don't do this, you wouldn't be allowed to say, I insist on doing it, if it's really a matter of tzelem elokim. It's a mandate rather than a heter. I think that's something that's worth considering. But I grouped a few heterim here, or mandates, if you will, into three categories. Number one, preventing embarrassment in social interactions. So I brought you the Nishmas Avram in source number 18, who talks about a woman who lacks eyebrows, and the question of being able to tattoo eyebrows on. So those who remember the class we had on micropigmentation will remember that this is a derabanan that we're talking about. We had various reasons why micropigmentation would at worst be a derabanan and not a deoraisa, and because of kavod habrios, therefore it is justified. Another one in source number 19 is a bad breath case. From Rabbi MordechaI Torczyner in his Badei HaShulchan, on the Ktos HaShulchan, he talks about a person applying medication to alleviate bad breath on Shabbos. He says, he says they permit rubbing some kind of medicine, some kind of powder, whatever it is, on one's teeth because of bad breath. But he says, on the other hand, they didn't permit an emetic for a person to make himself throw up if he's drunk and he's feeling sick. They didn't allow that. The gamzeh in a refuah, he says, I don't understand. Why is one okay and one not okay? Is one medicine now not? What is this? V'ze'ev shalatari, he says, you could answer. They were lenient for reach hapeh, for bad breath, because of human dignity. That is human dignity. They were more lenient than with making himself throw up. But to get rid of intoxication, there we don't say that the heter for kavod habrios. He was that worried about his dignity, he shouldn't have gotten drunk in the first place. That's his argument. He says you can't use medication to alleviate the hangover when you should have thought of that before you had a drink. I'm going to leave the drinking discussion to the experts, but that's my point in bringing it is more of the bad breath point. He's allowing the medication.
Without this, you would have no wishes to use mouthwash on Shabbos?
So that's a really good question. That's what it sounds
There's
like.
no halacha. It's not like you're smearing.
No, but
he considers it a refuah. But
if it's a medication, right? If you are to say that it's a medication, that's the question. How do you view things which are fundamentally about aesthetics? It's not food.
But Shulchan part of the Mishnah brings down the case too, being able to walk where there's no arrow, but like spices in your mouth because of the bad breath.
Yeah.
It's the same idea.
Yeah. I'm not going to get into the whole mouthwash medication as far as Shabbos
deodorant
and so on.
But in those days it was spices, and you had to crush the spices and all the other things that are.
Then the argument goes that you might end up.
Mouthwash.
Right. There's halacha there.
The spices you're carrying there are actually not. They're a decoy. In other words, their smell is meant to overpower whatever body odor a person has. It's not that you're applying it to your skin. You just carry the pill. Right. Another example of this is brought in Shmir Shabbos Keilchasa in source number 20, which is using an inhaler to diminish a runny nose if a person has a cold, and that's causing, again, a kavod habrios issue, because his nose is running. So these are all leniencies that are meant to prevent embarrassment in social interaction. Another category is enabling social support. So I brought you the Nishmas Avram in source number 21, where he talks about somebody who's a diabetic and who needs to have an insulin pump with him, attached to him. And he lives in an area where there's no Eruv. So what's he going to do? He's never going to go to shul on Shabbos. He's going to stay indoors all the time. He will have no social support, and people are going to talk about him. Why doesn't he show up in shul? They don't necessarily know that he needs an insulin pump. So the Nishmas Avram quotes here, Va'amar li in source number 21, Va'amar li Moreno Arav Rav Noiver Shlita, Mistaber sheyeh muter l'chola kazel atzeisim hamachshir b'Shabbos gam b'makom she'ein eruv ach ein rishus rabim gemura. He says you could go out with this insulin pump attached, assuming that it's a case that's only a Carmelis, right? It's a rabbinic issue, without an eruv, not a biblical rishus harabim. Imulovesha so b'shinoi, if you wear it in an unusual way. And he gives you an example. He takes the band that he uses to attach it and ties it around his leg, or his arm, and he puts the needle, sticks the needle in through that, so that he's not being carried really. Under the kavod habrios heter, and he continues in that regard to talk about this, and he says, the last line, he says, you should know specifically, the concern is that if he never goes to shul to daven, he never goes to a shir, people are going to talk about him, and that's a kavod habrios concern. So we'll allow him to go to shul with this. Finally, within this category of what it is that, or this area of what we permit for the sake of dignity, self-image issues. And I brought you one example in source number 22. The Rabbi MordechaI. He deals with a case where a person only has toilet paper that has writing on it on Shabbos, and using the toilet paper is going to erase the writing with erasure that's derabanan. It's not a deoraisa here; it's an isur derabanan, because you're not erasing it for the sake of writing. So it's only a derabanan, and he says because of kavod habrios, this is going to be allowed. What's the kavod habrios here? The kavod habrios, I think, is not an issue of he's going to walk around smelling bad. I think the kavod habrios here is simply his self-image. And the reason I say that is because we have quite a few other heterim. I ran out of patience with putting sources on the sheet. But the Nishmas Avram has a couple of heterim regarding children in bedwetting and patients in the hospital who need to get to the washroom and need to ring a bell for someone to help them. And they consider this to be, again, kavod habrios circumstances. There are limits to the kavod habrios heter. It's not all mutter. So one example of that would be a person who says, I'm embarrassed because I am doing a mitzvah, is not able to get out of the mitzvah by claiming embarrassment. So mikvah is a case in source number 23, when someone says, well, I'm going to be among people who don't really understand the mikvah, and no, that doesn't work. That's not an option. Rav Moshe Feinstein's tshuva is in number 23. If you have another way around the kavod problem, so then you can't say, well, kavod habrios is going to help me. So an example of that is regarding the Nishmas Avram that I brought you here in number 24, regarding urine collection, where they need to use an additive that's going to keep the urine from separating out, and that's a problem to do on Shabbos under Ma'aved. So the person says, I want to do the urine collection on Shabbos rather than do it during the week when I'm at work, because it's a big pain. If I'm at work, I'd want to do it on Shabbos. If that's when it has to be done is Shabbos, then fine, it has to be done then. But if the issue, is not that's when it's convenient, but the issue is kavod habrios, it's an indignity to me to do it when I'm at work, then the answer is take a vacation day. If that's what needs to be done, then take a vacation day then in order to be able to get it done. You don't do it on Shabbos when you have other options. And then the last point within this, and the key point for that Tosfos that I mentioned way back when, Tosfos wanted it to be a Gnai Gadol, a great disgrace, in order to justify overriding Halachah. So that's another element here where that has to be weighed here. It comes up in a couple of sources that I brought you in 25 and 26. The Stechemet talks about this regarding dyeing one's hair. And again, those who were there when we talked about the grooming issue, well, remember, we talked about this. Someone's hair goes prematurely gray. And he says, I want to be able to dye my hair. People are talking about me. Maybe it's like mine. It goes gray in funny spots. So the Stechemet says, not so fast. He's not himself. He's quoting a Rav Ashkenazi. And he says, you know what? The fact that people talk about you and point doesn't really qualify necessarily as kavod habrios. Now, I think that's a little bit cultural, but that's what he says. Or another example, Rav Sternbach in source number 26. This always bothers me, this one. He's dealing with the issue of reattaching a finger for somebody. It got cut off in an accident, and you only have a few hours and before it's going to be unusable. So would he be allowed to have the surgical reattachment on Shabbos? Actually, no. Is his case a Shabbos case, or was his case the Kohen reattaching it? No, I think his case was the Shabbos case. And he says, really, it's not so embarrassing to be short a finger, or to have a partial finger. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to embarrass you. He says, he says, that's really only big embarrassment, like going out without clothing on. That's embarrassing. Having a short finger, happens. I don't know, that's what he said. There has to be a Gnai Gadol. It has to be a grave type of a thing. Okay, so what we've seen so far, before we get to our last and very important point, is the power of kavod habrios, such that it does override derabbanans. It may override a deoraisa with shevel tasa. It's a very serious thing. And we said that it may be because of tsar, it may be because of tselem elokim, and today we may argue for health issues as well. And we applied it to various areas, preventing embarrassment, enabling social support, and even self-image issues, noting that there are certain limits, such as it has to be Gnai Gadol, a very serious diminution of one's honor. That's roughly what we've said over the last 52 minutes. But our second question, what about somebody with unique needs? Is this simply based on what society feels? Well, what about somebody whose needs, perhaps because of mental health issues, lead them to a situation where something will be very degrading for them, and it wouldn't necessarily be for others? What if you have somebody who's particularly shy about his appearance, and he suffers from something that is going to make him stand out? They don't want to be noticed by other people, and now they're going to stand out. So Rav Yitzchak Glazer, also known as Rav Yitzchak Pitterberger, in the pre-Yitzchak, argues that it is subjective. It's gauged based on each individual. And I have a lot more material here than we have time for, but I'm going to see what we can do with it anyway. And we'll get to what we get to. The Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Lamed says regarding restoring a lost object, and we quoted this before, that if you are a zakein, you are an elder, and eino leficha v'odo, it is not fitting for your dignity for you to stoop to return the item, then you are exempt from returning it. Got it? Remember that? Okay. The Rambam's formulation in 27 is instructive. The Rambam says, Matzah sako kupa, you found a bag, you found a box, right? That's the language we used before. Im haya chacham o zakein mechubad. If you are a sage or you are an elder who is honored, who doesn't normally get such things, then you're exempt. So in other words, it's not about being a chacham. It's about being a chacham or stam an elder. You're an older man. You don't normally pick up stuff like this. And the Torah brings that, and the Shulchan Aruch brings that. That's one school of thought. The Ritva disagreed. And the Ritva, quoted in the Shita Mekubetza, says no. The Patur, the leniency, is only about Kavod HaTorah. Now, and therefore it's not going to be subjective, it's only going to be objective. What's your standing? Are you a Beit Tamil Chacham or not? So there are challenges you can bring to each side. You can challenge the Ritva's view that it's just the Talmid Chacham because the Gemara didn't say Kavod HaTorah, it said Kavod HaBrios. Right? It seems fairly clear. It's Kavod HaBrios. It's anybody. Unless you say that's only applicable for the case of lost objects, the Gemara in Shavuos brought the lost object case when it was discussing testifying in front of the judge who is lesser than you are, which was a Kavod HaTorah case. And yet it applied the Kavod HaBrios principle. It sounds like it should be for everybody. On the other hand, if the Gemara brought you the Aveda case, the lost object case, regarding the case of the Chacham, maybe that teaches me, no, that it's dafka about Chachamim. So the Pri Yitzchak stance, which he says in number 28, is that it really is all about Kavod HaBrios. That's his position. It's the kavod which we noted from Dr. Blitzstein earlier is common to all human beings, and it is subject to your personal dignity. If you have personal sensitivity such that for you this is a big deal, that constitutes Kavod HaBrios. Rav Naftali Amsterdam wrote a letter to the Pri Yitzchak. They were peers. I think they're even relatives. He wrote a letter which was published in the Pri Yitzchak in source number 29, in which he disagreed. He says the fact that you needed a pasuk in the Torah to tell you by restoring lost objects that a zaken is exempt, and you didn't simply say Kavod HaBrios, teaches me that it's more than just about Kavod HaBrios. It has to be kavod for all human beings, min ha'enoshi, the human race. It has to be something that's a disgrace for everybody, not just for you. I brought it in 29. Kavod HaBrios lo nema rak al davar shu gnai lechol min ha'enoshi, for the entire human race. Yeh me'ezeh min sheyeh, whatever the case is, meis mitzvah, walking around without clothing on, whatever it is. As opposed to where it's only a disgrace for you personally based on your standards. The Pri Yitzchak says, really? Then you tell me why it is that you were allowed to escort the Avel on his path. That's not a Gnai L'chol Hamin HaEnoshi for the Avel to walk without the Kohanim in his entourage. That's such a big deal? That you're going to tell me it's a Gnai L'chol Hamin HaEnoshi? The Pri Yitzchak was not impressed. And wrote his response in source number 30. Rav Eliyahu Bashi Doron, in his Chuvas Binyan Av, defends Rav Naftali Amsterdam. He says it's still a bizayon, it's a disgrace for all avelim, for all mourners. That's like all minha enoshi. That's like the entire human race. Just like kavod malachim is honor for all kings. That's his argument to defend it. Rav Eliyahu Bashi Doron also did not believe that it was subjective. He said if it's going to be subjective, then everybody can invent whatever they want. I can decide I don't carry bags, and therefore I never have to return a lost object for anybody who lost a bag. It doesn't matter. I don't carry bags. Is every person really free to create this kind of subjective standard? So you really have a machlokas. However, I would argue, going back to my point about where Kavod HaBrios comes from in the first place, this debate only applies if Kavod HaBrios is a Tzelem Elokim issue. However, and even a tzar issue, but if in fact it is a health issue, then even if it's just one person in the entire planet of however many billion people, that's, for them, this is a health issue, you're talking about a self-image issue, then I think we come back and say, this for that person is Kavod HaBrios. Even if you're normally not making it subjective, I think it becomes so. Not really under Kavod HaBrios as much as a banner of Pikuach Nefesh and health, but I think that we do have to look at it in that light. There's a lot more to be said. I rushed because I had a lot more material than we had time for. I apologize. Hopefully it was somewhat clear. God willing, Rabbi Avi next week is going to be speaking about OCD. and that'll be at 8:30. Thank you very much.